Welcome to our webcast, Let's Get Physical, Building a Future-Proof Infrastructure Foundation, sponsored by Panduit. I'm your moderator, Mark Hosky, and I'm happy to join you today on behalf of Control Engineering. Each element of your physical infrastructure must be integrated in its design and deployment to ensure your industrial networks and control systems provide sufficient performance margin within the specified environmental conditions. This webinar will help enhance your ability to design and deploy enterprise and industrial networks, as well as industrial control systems. You will hear from Panduit and Rockwell Automation about the value lifecycle advisory services can bring to help you meet aggressive build schedules and reduce installation time. To get the best results from the Control Engineering webcast platform, please make note of the following as you participate in today's event. If you're having technical problems from audio or the slide presentation, click on the question mark at the top right-hand corner of your screen to bring up a list of system checks to make before escalating to an online technician. If you are experiencing issues with your slides or audio, please refresh your browser or click Refresh Media directly under the presenter's headshot. You can control the volume settings of the button of the webcast by adjusting the volume on your computer or by adjusting the volume on the webcast platform. If you need a technician, type a message into the Ask a Question box and someone will get to you as quickly as possible. Individual technical questions will be answered in the Answered Questions area on the left-hand side of your screen. You can also use the Ask a Question box on the left-hand side of your screen to type questions for the speakers during the presentation for the Q&A session at the end. You may ask questions at any time during the presentation. We'll get to as many as time allows. Questions for today's speakers will be answered verbally during the Q&A session at the end of the webcast. To download the presentation slides, or if you'd like to download a certificate of completion for today's event, use the event resources on the left-hand side of your screen. This webcast is being recorded, including the Q&A session. We'll post the archive on the Control Engineering website in a few days, and we'll send you an email message with a connecting link when it's ready so you can share it with others. Today's webcast sponsor is Panduit. Thank you for sponsoring and supporting this program. Now I'm happy to introduce today's distinguished speakers. Andy Banathy is the Industrial Automation Solutions Architect, Industrial Automation for Panduit Corporation, a global leader in network and electrical infrastructure solutions based in Tinley Park, Illinois. In this position, Andy is responsible for the physical industrial network reference architecture, design tools, and design aids. Andy has responsibility for communicating reference architectures and designs, guiding customers to design and implement the best-of-breed industrial network and computing systems for their architecture and applications. Andy has been with Panduit for 23 years, with more than 20 years designing and implementing state-of-the-art manufacturing execution systems, statistical process control, workflow automation, maintenance management systems, and ERP integration systems. Andy was an early adopter of overall equipment effectiveness, starting in 1993, applying it to over 600 manufacturing processes. Andy was instrumental to integrate Panduit's business systems with manufacturing, first with MRP material management, and more recently with Oracle ERP integration. Andy is a graduate of Marquette University with a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering. Dan Rodriguez is Global Operations and Business Development Manager for Consulting Group of Rockwell Automation. He has 15 years of experience in the electrical automation and manufacturing fields. Dan has global responsibilities for the business development and delivery of projects for the safety, networks, and cybersecurity and reliability divisions of Rockwell, and is working with many of the global accounts in the manufacturing and critical infrastructure sectors. Dan represents Rockwell Automation in educational events, trade magazines, and automation fairs. Responsible for the network infrastructure consulting services with a focus on Ethernet and Ethernet IP, and works considerably in the industrial networking area. I'm Mark Hosky, webcast moderator and content manager for Control Engineering since 1994. Before we continue, please take a moment more to remind yourself about dealing with the technical issues during the presentation. Now we'll go ahead with the presentation, and you'll take over from here.
Thanks, Mark. Perhaps you are building a new plant or adding a production line. Maybe your current system is outdated and needs to be upgraded. We'll go over the intricacies of this process, starting with a background in the industrial networking infrastructure. We'll look at the weakest link to this process. Then we'll contrast the strengths and weaknesses of doing it yourself and advisory services. We'll go over case studies on various implementations and then conclude with major points and resources that are available. I will now hand off to Dan Rodriguez from Rockwell Automation.
Hello, everyone. Today, let's take a look at the manufacturing environment. In today's environment, we need to be more productive, agile, and sustainable. To accomplish those goals, we actually need to focus inward. We got to take a look at our plant from the receiving, processing, controls, packaging, and shipping. We also need to give a good look at the entire enterprise, from the supplier to customers and all the operations that happen and the day-to-day activities from one site to another, in case that you are a global customer or have multiple sites around the country. But more important, you also have to look at your goals and challenges. Most of the goals and challenges in today's environment has to do with lowering the total cost of ownership, increase the time to market, have a much better asset optimization, have a better risk management plan that is related to our networks. All these can be addressed by implementing what is called network convergence, which is nothing but the ability to connect more assets and applications while we are being highly integrated between the two. And that way, we are also enabling the collaboration across all the boundaries. Many of our customers are in different stages in this journey to accomplish network convergence. Because of that, the typical pain points that I see when I am discussing an opportunity with a customer, the issues that they are having are related most of the time to inefficiency and vulnerability. Let's face it, 20, 30 years ago, when this particular network was actually implemented, two things. The actual size of the network wasn't even an issue. So obviously, scalability wasn't in their mind. So when they designed the network, they weren't really thinking about how this network was going to grow over the years. But in addition to that, security wasn't even in the picture. Because of that, and the typical challenges that we are seeing in the business environment right now, two new trends have been added to these particular pain points, which are inflexibility, in which, as I mentioned to you guys, now we are facing networks that are not scalable. We are seeing issues with devices that we are adding to the network that have so many pieces of information that is enabled to them. We are even talking about limit switches. And because of our business challenges, we want to go ahead and get that data, because how we are able to get that data, analyze it, and use it for our advantage is what is going to determine whether we are going to have an edge over our competitors. And in addition to that, our networks have been growing, but we still have a lot of legacy equipment and legacy proprietary networks that, in case there is a failure in that particular area, we might actually fear a network lock-in because we don't have the actual capabilities to troubleshoot it. So, explaining that situation, the typical issues that I see from my customers, or the typical questions that I see from my customers, are laid out in this slide. I'm not going to go to every single one, but they are usually related to network traffic issues. Customers want to actually understand how to get access to the new data that the new devices that they're adding to their network they are providing. How do they comply with the new regulations? And I'm sure for those of you that are in the power industry right now, you are dealing with those challenges, because now with the implementation of NERC CIP 5, there are a lot of new regulations that are changing from CIP 4. And in addition to that, how can they actually implement a network that is secure and scalable while allowing an efficient system for production? And now I'll give it to Andy.
Thank you. When it comes to design and deployment, the physical layer usually gets the least attention. The impact is often overlooked and severely underestimated. Consequently, a significant portion of network downtime, approximately 80%, is attributed to physical layer connectivity. How does this happen? There may be a disconnect with the project lead and installer. The installer is often left on their own and need to work around issues, perhaps cutting corners. Another cause is the pressure to get an installation done quickly and cheaply. Move adds and changes are done haphazardly. Cabling and ports are not well protected, leading to security vulnerabilities. In an Industry Week magazine survey, 40% listed security concerns as a major barrier to provide connectivity to machines, equipment, and processes. If it looks unsecure, it probably is. If we look at a typical spends for automation projects, software accounts for 60%. Networking is next at 23%, followed by operations at 10%. At the very bottom is the cabling infrastructure at 7%. IT budgets typically prioritize spending on big-ticket items like software and hardware, with a small percentage of budget going to cabling. Granted that the cabling infrastructure material cost is low compared to hardware and software, but it can be very labor-intensive with many possibilities for mistakes. The other thing to notice here is the refresh for equipment versus the physical layer cabling infrastructure. A company may upgrade networking equipment 4 to 5 times over the lifetime of the cabling infrastructure. It pays to be forward-looking when planning the cabling and connectivity, planning for a life cycle as long as 20 or more years. We just had a major building material customer come to us as their cabling infrastructure is not cutting it. As they are now experiencing a lot of BYOD, bring your own devices, and the need for wireless is making a major impact. The cabling was installed only 7 years back. They are now faced with replacing it. So you are building a new network line. Let's look at a typical new line implementation. First, budgets need to be approved. Once approved, a control technology is selected, followed by selecting the machine builder and systems integrator to bring it all together. You need to ask yourself, is my architecture robust, reliable, and future ready? This leads to digging in deeper, like the amount of cabling needed for the project. There may be a decision on cable media, like using fiber for long distance or high electrical noise, as well as having the desired bandwidth. Perhaps a wireless infrastructure needs to be deployed to accommodate tablets or other devices. Access points require cabling and may carry a lot of traffic. There's always a major consideration for controlling network access for security reasons. The impact of downtime may lead to decisions for resiliency. Designs need to accommodate growth and connectivity as manufacturing expands. This is a lot to consider. Whether it is a greenfield or brownfield, An assessment needs to be made to answer questions like these. An assessment usually starts with the basics. Count up all the devices that need to be connected. This could be machines, sensors, controllers, cameras, drives, switches. And you need to plan for today and the next 20 years. Then look at the traffic volume, type of data like video, data, control, and voice over IP, VoIP, and the criticality of that data for process control. This will lead to bandwidth requirements. Now walk through the plant and envision how to run cable. How harsh is the environment? Are there any obstacles in the way? Lastly, work with manufacturing operations to establish an agreed upon expected network availability. How critical is the network for operations? How much does downtime cost? Once you have the basics for a physical infrastructure design, start with a proven reference architecture to build from. The recommended is to apply the converged plant-wide Ethernet approach. The challenge is to translate your logical design into a physical design layout. This can be complicated with many nuances. For more detail on reference architecture, a slide at the end will list other recorded webinars as resources on this topic. Implementations go through these basic steps: assess, design, and deploy. We talked briefly about assess, the assess step, highlighting the basics, but there are other important considerations like grounding, environment, pathways, power, and more that lead to the next steps of the design. The design has many elements for layout, programming, part selection, panel designs, cable routing, and more. Typically, the deliverable for design include CAD drawings, bill of materials, and specifications. Now you are at a point to implement the design or deploy phase. At this point, you may need to bring in a different set of people for installation, validation, testing, and training. So let's take this a little deeper. The typical standard deployment follows these steps. In the design phase, it may take some time, especially if starting from scratch. A step like validate has some long activities to meet code requirements and standards like UL 508. In the procurement phase, putting together a BOM can be very time-consuming. What if there is a way to speed this up with less risk? An integrated solution takes out the guesswork with a pre-engineered, tested, and a validated solution. It is a building block approach like an integrated zone system or micro data center that can be dropped into your architecture. A solution like this reduces the risk of deployment to get the performance you need. Let's move on to advisory services. You could do network implementations on your own, do it yourself, or you can get help from an advisory service. There are different advisory services capabilities that can do some or all aspects of the implementation. An advisory service can be provided by a system integrator, a distributor automation specialist, or a vendor manufacturer like Panduit and Rockwell Automation. Let's contrast do-it-yourself and advisory services. Design. Experience matters, and typically an advisory service usually creates a better design factoring in lessons learned, are knowledgeable in new technologies and how to apply it, and may have first-hand knowledge for trade-offs. Rework avoidance. Mistakes are costly. Granted, the do-it-yourself knows the plant and operations along with the cause and effect based on what they have seen in the past. However, a new implementation may not be known to a do-it-yourselfer. An advisory service can leverage past projects to spot high-risk areas. Maintenance. When it comes to maintenance, identification and infrastructure management is key. A complete set of documentation is a typical deliverable from an advisory service that can be used throughout the life cycle. An advisory service usually incorporates best practices in identification like labeling and color coding, as well as cable management key for maintenance. Future-proof. When it comes to details of spare ports, available bandwidth, and network topologies, an advisory service has a better feel for what it takes to accommodate your growth. Initial cost. Well, hands down, a do-it-yourself implementation would have the lowest initial cost. It is not burdened with the services cost. However, when it comes to the network lifecycle, the advisory service is likely to be more cost-effective considering what I have mentioned above. Shorter time to ROI. If you are already busy with operations or projects, you may be resource limited. An advisory service brings you the extra horses you need to gain the benefits sooner. Typically, an advisory service pays for itself, producing a better quality solution. There are many types of advisory services specialties. Some providers can do nearly all the areas, while others can be very specialized, expert in one or a couple of other areas. A system integrator or an automation specialist can do most areas and are usually focused on a vertical like food or water and things like that. However, they may not have the expertise for more complicated situations or do not get into the installation part. This is where a company like Panduit fits in. Panduit Services is regarded as experts in the physical network design, such as translating the logical network architecture into physical infrastructure designs by providing a full documentation package, CAD drawings, specifications, and bill of materials, as well as deploy building blocks like integrated zone enclosures and micro data centers. A company like Rockwell Automation has expert services in control, logic, and network designs, as well as other services. When it comes to physical infrastructure evaluation, Panduit Services looks at it in 7 functional areas: thermal, grounding, rack power, pathways, labeling and administration, cabling, and racks and cabinets. Based on specific criteria from standards like TIA and best practices, a rating is applied on a scale of 0 to 5 to each area where 5 is best. In this example, grounding is a serious concern where racks are not bonded. This can lead to communication issues. In addition to a rating, each area has a comprehensive drill down with specific actionable findings with full documentation, including pictures. How does this work in the real world? In a recent project, Panduit Services was brought in to evaluate the cabling infrastructure to determine if it can handle additional cameras. Panduit Services evaluated the cabling and determined there was insufficient bandwidth for the cameras. Ultimately, this helped the customer justify the upgrade to a higher media such as fiber. So let's talk about the common issues that services like this can solve. Let's talk about communication or miscommunication. When IT and engineering aren't on the same page, communication can be challenging. Advisory Services facilitates the conversation with facts and not opinions. Let's look at the perspective. Typically, IT is focused on what they call the OSI layers 2 through 7. An advisory service sees the infrastructure from entirely different perspectives. That is, IT eyes are looking at the equipment where services eyes are focused on basically all the other stuff, the infrastructures and things like that. Quite often there's the blame game, finger pointing between IT facilities, engineering, and operations. It is usually a result from missing the first step, which was the assessment. The assessment that services provides prevents costly delays. Let's look at some of the overlooked items. Those who lead networking initiatives often take the physical infrastructure for granted. Advisory services like Panduit can uncover and strategically address the physical layers. Lastly, let's take a look at risk and mitigation of risk. Customers don't always think they need an assessment to support a new initiative. Perhaps they've done it before and believe it will be done the same way, and you'll get the same results. Maybe this thought and assessment delays the project or is an unnecessary cost. However, our experiences, Panduit Services, have seen many deployment delays due to the lack of upfront planning. So let's talk about Panduit and Rockwell working together. Panduit and Rockwell Automation have an alliance relationship that brings together the ultimate in physical network infrastructure from Panduit and a best-in-class logical network, control, and software from Rockwell Automation. How does this work? Panduit speaks the same language as Rockwell Automation and is familiar with the nuances of deployment. Panduit understands Rockwell Automation's converged plant-wide Ethernet architecture and can translate a Rockwell Automation logical design into a buildable physical infrastructure design complete with AutoCAD drawings, bill of materials, pathways, racks, and more. Having a formal alliance relationship, Panduit and Rockwell have worked out the details to work together, such as a common statement of work, where the customer buys from one source. When it comes to a zoned architecture, Panduit and Rockwell Automation work together to select the right integrated zone system. Rockwell Automation designs the switch architecture, achieving optimum traffic flow between equipment, while Panduit addresses the environmental impacts like harshness, cable management, and physical access to come up with the best integrated system placement and deployment. In a nutshell, Panduit and Rockwell Automation partnering can be looked at by the OSI network layers. Panduit primarily focuses on layer 1, the physical, where Rockwell Automation focuses on layers 2 through 7 from networking to applications. We've got it covered top to bottom. So let's talk about some of the success stories of advisory services, building blocks, and implementations. For this large metal manufacturer, the customer had a need to distribute more than 20 Stratix managed switches throughout a very large manufacturing campus environment. They came to Panduit as they needed a plan and a long-term strategy to deploy industrial switches and recognized that Panduit had the expertise to fill the gap. Panduit recommended a building block approach using integrated zone systems and micro data centers that is scalable for future needs and a predictable deployment strategy, allowing the customer to install the system in 3 phases. In addition, the integrated zone systems give the ability to expand the logical network as their needs change over time. There were 3 primary deployment phases, each having its own set of challenges and priorities. In phase 1, the core enterprise servers, switches, and DMZ were deployed. During the second phase, micro data centers were installed in production along with layer 3 switching that was tied back to the core. In the final phase, the integrated zone systems were tied together with a resilient Ethernet protocol ring wrap back to the micro data centers. The micro data centers were connected to a fiber mesh up to the enterprise. This architecture is designed to achieve a 99.999 uptime, 5 nines. In addition, Panduit Professional Services worked with the customer to develop a standards-based physical network infrastructure and architecture that could live and survive in a demanding environment with high environmental ratings, such as MICE. MICE is an environmental classification that can be found in TIA 1005. The lead process engineer or network upgrade project said, Panduit has the ability to fill a gap in industry. They have the knowledge, application skills, and holistic pre-configured solutions to meet all the aspects of the process network design, without using unproven ad hoc approaches and misguided concepts to meet the needs of an industrial application. This was the lead process engineer for this project. In this particular success story, this manufacturer, a paper processing plant, was undergoing a plant expansion to increase capacity. Also, they were at a point to refresh IT equipment in the control room. Rockwell Automation was brought in to design a turnkey drive system and manufacturing network, as well as manage the project all the way through deployment. Rockwell subcontracted to Panduit the physical network design, recognizing Panduit's expertise. This allowed Rockwell engineers to focus on what they knew best and hand off to Panduit the physical infrastructure. In the control room, Panduit designed and deployed a micro data center, including equipment drawing elevations for servers and switches, along with the bill of material. Panduit also provided structured bonding and wall penetration planning. Rockwell specified 5 integrated zone systems. Panduit took this requirement and created detailed drawings. Panduit provided specific drawings to each of the installer's specialties. The drawings were specific to their activities, such as the guy laying the conduit or pulling the cables. This worked out very well, and the contractors commented on that this project was very well organized, allowing them to move quickly and rapidly to meet the aggressive production launch date. I'd like to now hand this over to Dan.
Thanks, Andy. Another good example of Rockwell Automation and Panduit working together to meet customer needs is this particular case with a leading food company. This is a global company which had a common issue in most of their plants. Like as I mentioned in my earlier slide, many of the customers are dealing with a lot of legacy equipment, which unfortunately is being run by operating systems, by software packages that are running on their operating systems that are no longer supported. As you guys know, even Windows XP right now is no longer supported by Microsoft. So that was a challenge that they had. Obviously, they had a large install base amount of servers and clients that were running on unsupported operating systems. In addition to that, they didn't have an actual process for patching or for providing any type of antivirus solutions. Server Explorer was also another issue, in which is one application that is running on one operating system on one server. In addition to that, and as I mentioned in my initial slide, we are now being challenged to report more information and make more information available to senior management. So because of that, the necessity to increase the number of applications that will be collecting the data from these devices increase. And when I talk about specific software packages such as data historians, OE performance reports, etc. And what I believe was actually the most important factor of the issues that they were having, they didn't really have enough IT resources on site to support all these challenges that they're having. So Rockwell and Panduit, we joined together to provide a solution as a form of an industrial data center, which is not only are we providing the hardware, but it's a turnkey solution in which we are basically assessing the situation that you are in right now. We'll design the data center, provide the hardware as is shown in there, and then we also provide the necessary services to make sure that when this data center is implemented in your facility, all the assets that you want to virtualize are actually virtualized properly and they are running by the time we leave. So we provided that. But in addition to that solution, we also provided now an avenue for them to scale for the future. Not only did this data center had enough workloads to handle all of the legacy systems that they wanted to virtualize, but also provided a lot more spares that they could use for future systems, saving some money there. In addition to that, we provided a hardened environment that provides high availability and redundancy. We also implemented a higher level of security for them by implementing a patch management process and virus protection. And what I think is a really good value for customers, we also provide, by implementing an industrial data center, one number to call for support. Now you do not have to call a specific vendor for IT support and another specific vendor for the PLC controls environment support. Just one number to call for all your needs. As a result, for this particular opportunity, the customer was able to show real savings. In addition to that, obviously, they improved security. Now they have one number to call 24/7 for any type of issues, either in the IT or the OT environments. And they were also able to leverage the fact that Rockwell and Panduit are able to provide solutions as infrastructure as a service. So instead of having to go back and request for capital expense funding, they were able to pay a monthly fee for us to manage the implementation and the support, and were able to get it under the operational budget. Another opportunity, and this is another example, is a large global beverage company. They were actually introducing a new product that required that had a high demand. So it required for also a new construction, new retrofits, and more implementation of new lines in their facility. So because of that, they require for a full life cycle support from a vendor. So Rockwell and Panduit, we were able to get together and provide that solution to the customer. Not only were we able to design a system that was going to meet their needs, but also we were able to provide a turnkey solution for the full implementation of the system. Not only that, the installation, configuration, and as a result of this part of the first plant where we actually were able to successfully implement the system, we were able to productize the solution, allowing for that same solution pretty much be modular and installed in different plants, which helped them a lot because there was a deadline for them to complete these implementations, and it was really difficult for them to make it happen under the circumstances that they were before we got into the picture. So in addition to that, we were able to help them as well with a virtualized environment as a form of an industrial data center. And once again, the results were measurable cost savings for them. Now they have a layered defense in depth architecture that not only allows them to segment the network within the facility, but also which obviously helps with the network traffic issues that somebody might have, but also provide a secure environment. And now I pass it to Andy.
Thank you. In closing, the following are some pitfalls to avoid and how advisory services addresses them. First of all, don't cut corners on documentation, especially for the physical network infrastructure. A complete set of design and installation documents are critical for success. Keep in mind future growth needs. Think about what may be added to the network over the years. It's hard to anticipate, but as with the Internet of Things, there is an explosion of Ethernet devices going onto the manufacturing floor. We are now seeing cases where there may be 100 endpoint or connection devices on one production line only. Investment in high-performance cable media pays off for itself down the road, especially for expansion. There's typically very little cost differences as you go up in the cable media types. So going to a higher level cabling is not as high of a cost as you may think. The use of standards and reference architectures ensures optimal design. Lastly, think of the installer. What do they need, and what do they need to get the job done? Here's a list of resources that would help you also. Feel free to go to the Panduit.com website and download some of these references. Thank you for attending.
Well, thanks, Andy.
I'll now hand it over to Mark.
Yeah, thank you. Andy and Dan, that was a great presentation. I invite audience members to now please type in your industrial networking and network application questions. We're going to have a Q&A session here. You can type the questions for today's presenters in the Ask a Question box on your screen. We'll get to as many questions as we can before the top of the hour. Questions will be answered verbally during this Q&A session, and within a few days the presentation will be available for on-demand viewing. We'll post the archive on the Control Engineering website and send you an email message with a link connecting to it directly after it's ready. Now we'll move on to our questions. So first of all, how do I make an assessment of my network? Can you kind of walk through and step through the process?
Sure. Really, the best approach is to call in an expert. They have seen many installations, know what to look out for. If you're a do-it-yourselfer, you're really going to run the risk of missing critical areas. In some cases, you may need specialized equipment to assess network traffic. In general, you need to take the guesswork out of this and use a fact-based, non-partial type of an assessment approach.
What are some of the building blocks involved? You'd mentioned that at one point in the presentation.
Yes. Well, building blocks have a specific function. The integrated zone system is a ready-to-deploy switching system where all you need to do is connect the up and down link cabling. The micro data center building block is a compute, network, and storage system ready to deploy, let's say like a factory talk installation. It's ideal for like a virtualized environment where you can just drop in your applications. In addition, the building blocks have been designed and tested with known performance parameters. So, for example, with the micro data centers, these are known to work very well with the Rockwell Automation softwares, especially Factory Talk and Plant PAX. We also have additional resources. Panduit has additional resources that can go into this further, so I welcome you to go take a look at this online as well.
Good. Where can people find a list of advisory services that are available? Certainly there's a lot you can do with any application depending on what the needs are.
Sure. For advisory services, the best place is, like for Panduit, we actually have it right there on our main page, on our web page. So if you go to the panduit.com and then click on the Product Services tab, and then click on the Industrial Automation Services, you'll see a listing of what services are available. I believe Rockwell has something like this similar too. Maybe Dan, you can comment on that.
Yes, specifically to networks and security, it's on the main page as well. All you need to do is click on rockwellautomation.com/services, and we'll provide an overview of all the actual services that we provide, not only on networks but safety.
Good. Let's see. For those people who might be having trouble convincing management to implement the next project, how could an advisory service help convince management of what needs to be done?
That's an interesting question because, as many know, really management listens to the outside sources, and what we believe is that perhaps they are perceived as the experts, especially if the services providers are provided with many well-known clients or maybe even your competitors. In addition, advisory services have the experience to provide a realistic and believable schedule. I guess having the experience and knowing it gives the confidence of what they are presenting. So a well-thought-out assessment from an outside advisory service goes a really long way to show the specifics on what needs to be done. And in this way, if you have the same type of supporting documentation internally, the two together are very powerful.
Yeah, in addition to that, what I recommend is usually starting with a network assessment. As Andy mentioned, it will provide you a snapshot of where you are, not only on the security side, but in the network infrastructure side. And it's actually the only way to show how secure and reliable your network is. So it will be the first piece of document that you might want to show to senior management if you want to secure funding or actually show them, as I mentioned, the big picture of where they are and what are the actual critical challenges that they're facing, and which might actually cost a lot of money production-wise if they actually happen. So.
Very good. Another question. I was just brought in to manage multiple facilities. Can services come in quickly to assess the health of the networks that are in those facilities?
Well, coming in new to something like this can be really overwhelming. I can imagine it's hard to distinguish fact from fiction. You really don't know the source of the information, what people are telling you, and whatnot. So you're probably hearing many different and sometimes contradictory stories because people have different pain levels and maybe have different types of agendas or objectives. So really an assessment or an audit by a service provider will clearly show you where your problems are as well as where they are not. And it can give you also an idea of what it's going to take to fix those types of problems and the costs involved so that you can plan budgets for the future to get the optimal type of performance you're looking for.
Yeah, and specifically to multiple facilities where there is a large amount of equipment and probably a full assessment on every single area of the network is not possible. Rockwell and Panduit, we have joined together to provide a standard service to customers that is the same regardless of the facility location. I'm talking about global scale. So not only are you getting the same, but many customers are actually leveraging our assessments to help them classify the assets in a way that they can prioritize which ones are going to be the ones that are going to be into the next step as far as the risk mitigation. It allows you to have, once again, the snapshot of where you are at a global scale.
Good. We do have some additional time. If audience members do want to type in their questions, we'll get to as many as we can by the top of the hour. I noticed there were a lot of industry application examples at the end of the presentation. That's always helpful to hear specific advice. Are there any trends by industry that have particular challenges related to how a network is set up in the facility?
Well, yes, certainly there are. And from a physical infrastructure side, one of the things that is important is the environment. So one of the things that we look at, and I'm sure is common out in industry, is called MICE. This is a classification, mechanical, ingress, chemical, climatic, and electrical, and it's part of TIA 1005. And what's important here is that it lays out how to assess your environment and to get the proper cabling to survive in those environments. So often we may see a customer run, let's say, copper cabling in a high electrical noise environment where really a fiber is a better option because fiber is not affected by electrical noise. The other thing that we're also seeing as far as is trends, which you kind of mentioned in the beginning, is that many of you probably heard of these Internet of Things. I believe by one thing I saw is like by 2022, there's going to be 50 billion Internet devices out there. I mean, there are more Internet devices than there are people out there. So there's an explosion in this networking area. And another trend that is also coming along is wireless. Now, customers may think wireless, you don't need wires for that. Well, the opposite is true. The opposite is really the truth here, is where you need very good cabling for your wireless access points, because the access points have to carry the capacity of all those devices. So those are some of the trends and some of the things I've been saying. Maybe you can add to that.
Yeah, so those are I agree with the trends that he's seeing in the market. As far as pain points, what I usually see with my customers is that they do have what they have is a flat network. There is no level of segmentation whatsoever. But even though there's no segmentation, they continue to add more and more devices into the network. And these devices, unfortunately, are becoming, well, fortunately and unfortunately, it's good to get all this data, but they are smarter. and they come with a lot of information that is fully available out of the box. So their connections is open by default. As soon as they put it on the network, whether you want this data or not, this device is, as soon as you put it in the network, is starting to send packages all over the network. And unless you have an actual network segmentation in place, you might be vulnerable to issues with network traffic. So that's one of the major issues I see. At the same time, managing security properly is an issue, and what to do in order to provide an environment that is secure, that is also compliant, but at the same time, it allows me to run production at the levels that my management wants.
Good. Here's another question. When somebody calls for help, what questions do you ask first? Maybe you could kind of run through the process.
Well, typically, it can vary in a couple different ways. One of them is where they have a severe problem and it's bringing down manufacturing, and downtime is expensive. So they're at a breaking point. They're saying, they cannot run their equipment. So in this case, an assessment is probably your best approach. Get in there quickly, figure out where your bottlenecks are. The other type of thing is that you get the help for plant expansions or upgrades. There's like the equipment refresh. So for example, the networks of just a few years ago, the proprietary networks are really going away. So customers are not as familiar with Ethernet IP, and need the help to understand, well, I used to have this data highway or Profinet or these other types of networks, and then now they have to transition to this new network and need help to understand that. So this is where an advisory service can bring that along, can bring you along to do that.
How do you assess future needs with an application? And you mentioned some of the changing throughput needs that some production lines need, perhaps 100 connections as opposed to just a few years ago. That can be a very difficult question. Some people throw out maybe some factors like a 40% spare. So for example, if they're going to design a system, they're also going to accommodate for at least 40% more spares into their system for the unknown. But interestingly, I might actually go higher nowadays because, to me, the explosion in Ethernet devices. Just this morning, when I was looking at a particular machine, the one machine itself, an assembly machine, had something like 35 different Ethernet connections. And just imagine, this is just one machine. So as you multiply that across the factory floor, yes, it becomes hundreds, if not thousands. So generally, what we're kind of seeing is that for a manufacturing floor today, you may want to think about, let's say, 500 Ethernet types of connections, or even higher. So to me, it's maybe based on, you can use a percentage spare, or think about where some of the industries, where some of the people in the industry are going as far as planning for, let's say, 500 to 1,000 type of connections. Good. Talking about network segregation, is it best practice to implement physical network segregation, VLANs, or other methods? How do you go about that?
Dan, maybe you're better for this question.
Yeah, so customers, there are many ways that you can do network segmentation. I've seen it all different scenarios. So some customers, what they do is they add another, let's say, in order to segment the network, they add another Ethernet module into the PLC. That way they have one network for the controls area and another network device that goes to the enterprise. Obviously, that's not scalable and it's not future ready. What I see that is working the best right now is network address translation. And basically what you do, it allows you to obviously have the segmentation, but at the same time, it allows you to save into a number of IP addresses that are available on your network. Because of IPv4, the number of IP addresses is limited, or is large, but still limited. Once we move into IPv6, obviously that's going to go into the billions, so that's not going to be an issue. But network address translation will allow you to, for example, you have two similar machines in the network, by implementing a network address translation switch topology into that particular network, you are not only able to segment the two, but the subsystem of each machine can become an island with the same IP addresses. That way you are saving into IP address account that you have while you are providing segmentation. So that's what I see is one of the most effective and cleanest ways to accomplish this. Again, it's not the only way, but it is, to me, the most efficient one for the future, even for scalability. So.
Very good. For expert end users or for system integrators, commercial IP installers, are there training sessions to get for plant-wide Ethernet?
Certainly, there's a lot of areas. For example, I believe there's the RS Tech Ed that's coming up by Rockwell Automation. There are other online resources. Ethernet IP website, I think, is a good one. Another really good training opportunity is Industrial Ethernet IP Advantage. This is the IIPA website. This is a fabulous site that has all sorts of training material and documentation. So I welcome everybody to sign up for the Industrial IP Advantage website.
When people begin a networking project, are there certain overlooked aspects of a project or an area that you see where common errors in judgment when they begin a project?
Well, I'll tell you. I'll speak from the physical perspective, and then Dan can speak more from the architectural. But from a physical aspect, a lot of times cable management is one area that really gets overlooked.
I love some of your pictures there. The application pictures were quite amazing.
Yeah, and one of the big keys here, and especially the advisory service can offer, is identification and labeling. I tell you, having labels on both ends of your cable is worth their weight in gold, if not more. I mean, when you're in a troubleshoot situation and you don't know where that cable goes, and now you got to ring it out and figure out where it's at, that could be a nightmare, especially, let's say, very late at night and whatnot. So identification is a key area that's overlooked. Another one is documentation. It's unbelievable the people that don't know where their cables go. They just see a bunch of cables up in the rafters, and you're trying to figure out, where these go, and then it takes a lot of time and a lot of money. And what happens is then customers start putting more cable in because they don't know where it goes. So they run another line, they run another line, they run another line, and as you saw in the beginning, you get this thing called network sprawl. So to me, identification, documentation, those are areas that are very commonly overlooked.
Dan, anything to add? Yeah, so once again, it depends on what project you're talking about. If it is a new greenfield project, obviously we need to understand all the requirements, all the pieces of equipment that are going to be part of the network and what they're going to be interacting with. Similarly, if it is an existing project with an existing piece of equipment, as Andy mentioned, documentation is important. I see a lot of customers, and this is why we have added this as part of our actual assessment, in which we not only provide an assessment of the networks and security policies, but also provide an inventory of everything that is part of the network. I see a lot of customers that don't even know how many IP addresses are available, what devices are talking to each other. So that is a problem. But that's if you're going to do an assessment. In addition to that, you have to design, thinking about the future. And one of the questions was, how many IP addresses should I plan for? And that's going to depend on your requirements. And obviously, working with an expert that is not only comfortable in the OT environment, but also on the IT environment, he will allow you for you to get that information and plan for that properly.
Well, great. Thank you so much for answering the questions. Thanks to our great speakers, Andy Banathy and Dan Rodriguez, for sharing their time and expertise. I'd also like to extend special thanks to our sponsor for today's webcast for all of the information provided in today's event. Hang on just a second, though. Now that we're just about done, we'd want to hear how we did. The exit survey will pop up on your screen as soon as the webcast ends. Please take a moment to complete it as we use this information to improve our webcasts. On behalf of CFE Media and Control Engineering, thanks for attending this webcast. Copyright 2014 CFE Media. This concludes our webcast. Thank you very much.